Welcome, welcome everyone. This is Dr. Stephen Hobbs from the WELLth Movement. WELLth is spelled W-E-L-L-T-H. You're joining us as part of the Wellther Series. There are people that I'm meeting and I know that I want to introduce you to them because their ideas and suggestions, I believe, are going to move you forward in business and life. So wealth being about well living and well-being to the nth degree, Wellthers are people who offer these insights about well-being and well-living. And I have an amazing person on the call with me today, and he's out of Spain. And he's a Scottish man who is living in Spain and enjoying himself there. And I'll have him introduce more of himself here in a second. But I'd just like to share with you is I've had some amazing conversations with this gentleman over the last couple of years. And I said to him, well, let's get together and get you on the Wellthers Series. And he agreed, and here we are. And what we're going to do is actually do a 5-part series. Yes, 5 interviews talking about the inner cosmos, how we resemble the universe, and coming at it from different angles. And I know you'll really enjoy what he has to share. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Chris Thomson. And Chris, if you'd like to just fill in a little bit more about who you are, then that would be great so people can get to know you.
Sure. Well, I'm in northeast Spain, in Catalonia. You've probably heard of Catalonia. The capital is Barcelona. And I live right up against the French border in the Pyrenees mountain. So fantastic place to live, wonderful. It's a real gift to live here. Yeah, what Steve says is absolutely right. He and I have had lots of really interesting conversations over the last, what is it, Steve, about 2 years?
2 years, yeah.
And the topic today, the topic for this series sounds a bit odd when you first hear it, the idea of an inner cosmos, when of course most people think of the cosmos as out there, that big thing out there. So but I'm very interested in an idea, in the proposition that in some ways, in some very significant ways, we human beings resemble the cosmos. In a way, we are miniatures of it. Now, that's quite a big statement to make, I accept. And if it turns out to be true, it has very far-reaching implications.
And I believe that your sort of work history has been kind of interesting. Can you just give us like and I know we could go for a couple of minutes, but just give us that 30-second sort of brief overview of some of the highlights that sort of got you to this point at the moment. Then I'll ask you to dive into the inner cosmos story. Okay,
I'm not sure how I describe my career, as odd or eccentric or just plain mad. Left school, went straight to medical school in Glasgow to study medicine, University of Glasgow. It didn't last very long because I found out soon that it wasn't really for me. I wasn't cut out to be a doctor. So I ended up studying Chinese. And I did it as a double degree. So I did Chinese and economics in parallel. Very interesting time to do it. The Vietnam War was in full swing. The Cultural Revolution had just started in China. So a lot of interesting things going on. And my first proper job after that was at the Bank of England in London. The university said, would I come back and do some research? So I was tempted to go back, so I did go back and did 3 years researching scientific Chinese. In other words, how the Chinese developed languages for the sciences, chemistry, mathematics, medicine, that kind of thing. I was now married with a child, and we decided to go back to Scotland. So I had to find a way of surviving in Scotland, and I chose to become a lawyer. And in a way, that was the middle, let's say, kind of conventional part of my life, being a lawyer in Scotland. And I was divorced eventually in the mid-80s, and decided to use that big change in my life to change my life, if that makes sense. I don't want to ramble on too much just now, Steve. If you want me to continue, I will.
Well, just give a little bit about what you're sort of working on at this point in time.
Okay. I ended up being a national advocate for alternative medicine, and because of that, I got very involved in what for me were unusual things. So Chinese medicine, homeopathy, all that kind of thing. And that's when I first began to really think differently about the world. I'd already been reading books by Rudolf Steiner earlier on, but because of my career in law, I hadn't taken that very far. But now, because I was in this new world, I was able to meet different people and take the ideas further. Eventually, I ended up here in Spain, in Catalonia, at first in Barcelona. That was about, let me see, 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago. And I began teaching a new kind of course, and the course was in consciousness. I was very interested in consciousness. I was particularly interested in, could it be taught? You know, I realized people talk about consciousness, it's a very interesting topic and all that. But my particular interest was in, could you teach people to become more conscious? That was my basic question. And the answer is yes. The short answer is yes. We might come back to that at some point. And out of that, I wrote a book, not about consciousness as such, but about putting consciousness into practice. And therefore, the book was about intelligence. So for me, intelligence is putting raised consciousness into practice, you know, how to be intelligent in the world. In fact, if I had to define intelligence, I would say it's all about behavior. It isn't about brain power, it isn't about IQ, it isn't about any of those things, although they are part of it, okay? It's about our behavior. So very smart people can be very stupid in practice. And so-called not very bright people can turn out to be intelligent in practice. So I wrote the book, it was called Full Spectrum Intelligence. And about that point, I began talking to you.
Yes, and that's where we sort of jumping off now, because we went a lot of different places in that conversation. And just for everyone who's listening, the contact coordinates and the link for Chris's book will be at the end of the video, and or somewhere around the video in the supporting text. So just to let you know, it'll be there for you. And we're here today now because of this 5-part series, and the topic where we sort of zoned in on, it came into, was this notion of inner cosmos and how we resemble the universe. And can you just give us a little bit of background of how you've come to focus in on that at this point in time, that topic, and then what we'll do is we'll start to unpack it for people. But I think it would be great to hear just a little bit of that background story.
Sure. So at school, I did the sciences, biology, chemistry, physics, which I continued when studying medicine. And when I left law in the mid-80s and went into this new world of alternative medicine, I joined something called the Scientific and Medical Network, which is a body of people about 2,000 strong, who, well, it first began because some scientists in the 70s felt they couldn't say things in public that they wanted to say without their careers being jeopardized. That's how the thing began. In any event, I met some very interesting people, and, you know, I began questioning what you might call the science story. In other words, the story that science tells us about the way things are, the way the universe began, the way we began, our relationship to the universe, all of that, okay? And the more I learned about the science story, the more details I picked up about the Big Bang and evolution and all that, the more I questioned it. It just felt more and more not true. I could see why scientists said what they said. I could well understand that. But for me, it felt less and less true. If I was to paraphrase the science story, I mean, very, very briefly, okay? It goes a bit like this. The universe began for no reason, and it began from nothing. So there was nothing, and then suddenly there was something. That's not quite true. The scientists would say there was a singularity out of which the universe began, but even so, it was basically a point. So it was nothing. So that's the first part that you have to start questioning. How is that possible? And then eventually we turned up, okay? So billions of years later, in this exploding universe, we kind of turned up. And again, according to science, we turned up randomly. We are the products of chance, okay? It was chance that brought together all the factors that brought life into being. And out of that, these early forms of life, we evolved. And everyone knows that story. It's the story of evolution. And I thought, you know, that there are two big things, in fact, three, but there are two big things in that story that just don't ring true. There's the first part. The universe began by chance from nothing, okay? Woof. That doesn't ring true, doesn't feel true. And the second part is we began by chance, okay? We are random products of the universe. And if you turn around and look at that story, it means that basically we inhabit a meaningless universe. There's no meaning to it. And our lives are basically meaningless. If there's any meaning at all, we have to, let's say, inject meaning into them, okay? But as far as the universe is concerned, it's just out there, very big, it's dead, and we are smaller than microbes as far as it's concerned, okay? And basically have no meaning. And I've questioned all that, and I've been questioning that for at least 20 years and writing about my explorations of these questions. And out of that has come this idea of the inner cosmos.
So this sort of bigger picture story that you questioned got you into a bigger, smaller story called the inner cosmos, in a sense that can then be expanded back out again. I think there's sort of an in and out sort of weaving. That's a term that I would use, weaving in and out, in and out. But this idea of the meaningless, you're going to probably offer something that's counter to this meaningless storyline that you're sort of suggesting, that there's something else to it. What would that be called, just so we can anchor that in right now?
Good question. I guess we'll get into details in later videos after today. But if I had to capture it, and I'll try, so bear with me as I think this through. If I had to really capture the essence of this, I would say that we human beings are integral parts of the universe, okay? That the universe needs us as much as we need it. And I recognize that flies in the face of science, okay? I recognize that as soon as I say it. But I believe it to be true. I believe that we are integral parts, that we're not passengers in the universe. We really are part of it, integrated into it. Whereas, of course, the science story gives the impression that we are passengers here by chance, skimming the surface, so to speak, all right? There are many implications of this, and I won't go into all of them. I'll just mention one implication of what I've just said, that we are integral parts of this universe. One of the implications is we're not alone. You know, if the idea, the concept of humanity is integral to the cosmos, that strongly suggests we're not alone in the cosmos, that we are kind of spread out in the cosmos, okay? We are distributed in the cosmos precisely because we are part of it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and what that's doing is just offering that there's something more obviously coming in the next 4 videos that is going to anchor and weave this story together, because that's an important element of the ideas and suggestions you're going to make for everyone.
Can I come back? Can I come back to about the science story? Because I don't want to be unfair to science or to scientists, okay? Lest people think I'm doing that. I'm not. I mean, scientists have done a wonderful job. If you were to look up Wikipedia, the Big Bang in Wikipedia, for example, there's an enormous amount of information there. I was surprised when I looked it up recently, just how much information and study there is. So I take my hat off to scientists, you know, for what they do. But what I think scientists do, without necessarily knowing it, is to study aspects of the cosmos. They think they're studying the whole cosmos. That's taken for granted. But what I think they're doing in practice is studying its physical aspects. So science is very good at describing to us the physical nature of the universe. Equally good at describing to us the physical nature of the human being, our body, biochemistry, and so on, okay? That's not in doubt at all. What's in doubt is that they're describing the whole of the universe. They're describing all aspects. I don't think they are. And I don't think science is presently cut out to do so, given the way it does its exploration. So I'm, in a way, looking at both sides of the coin. If you imagine there's a matter-spirit coin, okay, with matter on one side of the coin and spirit on the other side of the coin. I'll come back to this later, maybe not today. I think matter and spirit are, in a way, complements of each other. They're not separate from each other. They are, in a way, the same thing, but seen from different viewpoints, seen from different perspectives, okay? So if you put the, let's say, the spectacles of science on, so I'm now putting the spectacles of science on, what I see now is the cosmos through the eyes of science, okay? And therefore I see its physical aspects, stars, planets, and so on. Equally, I see the physical aspects of the human being. Take off these glasses. I can't find another pair, but imagine this is a different pair. I'm putting on, let's say, the glasses of spirit now, okay, spirituality. Putting them on now. And suddenly everything is different. I'm looking at the same things. It's the same cosmos. This isn't some different cosmos out there, different from the cosmos. It's the same cosmos, but seen through different eyes. So I'm now seeing the spiritual aspects of the cosmos, which scientists don't see, but only because they use particular kinds of perception to view the cosmos. That's all I'm saying, okay? I'm in no way attacking science or belittling science. I'm not.
Okay, so, and thank you for that. We've had some conversations about the term, like, we need a new story, like a new science story. And that's going to be some of the things that we're going to cover in this 5-part series, is it not?
Yes.
Yeah. But let's go back to the inner cosmos. You chose inner cosmos for this series. Why did you choose that word? There's the outer cosmos, inner cosmos, but why are we looking at the inner cosmos? And so that we can get a little bit of a foundation from which to then jump into number 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the interview series.
Well, Uspensky was a student of Gurdjieff. You may have heard of Gurdjieff, famous Russian George Gurdjieff. You can look it up, George Gurdjieff. And Uspensky, another Russian, was, I think, the main student of his, okay? And I remember one thing that Uspensky wrote. I'm paraphrasing his words, so this isn't exact. He said, you know, in order to study the cosmos, we need to study ourselves. And then he said, in order to study ourselves, we need to study the cosmos. All right? That made a big impression on me because it rang true. It rang true because at that time I'd already been thinking, we are miniatures of the cosmos. I think it comes from the tablets of Hermes, the idea of as above, so below. And it's repeated in literature, I'm sure. But up to that point in my explorations, when I visualized the inner cosmos, what I visualized was a kind of onion inside us, okay, with layers. And those layers had their external equivalents outside us. Is that making some sense? But rather than call it the onion, which is an ungainly, clumsy thing to call it, it's only recently I came across or thought about the idea of inner cosmos. I know I'm jumping ahead, and I know we'll cover this in more detail later.
Oh,
just
for
to
sure.
give you a sense of it.
Yeah, and it's great is because we have to sort of position this term and, you know, how we represent the universe and the universe is in us. So there's something that's going to come out of this, these ideas and suggestions. And what would be something that you might suggest to people today before they see the next video in the series? One or two things that they could do right now to really start to line up and get a sense of what it is that you're talking about?
Well, I'm talking about evidence for the inner cosmos now, okay? What I regard as evidence for its existence. And one set of evidence is that in my lifetime alone, there have been three forms of consciousness, human consciousness, that have emerged in my lifetime alone. I'm 72. And for the want of a better term, they are humanity consciousness, that's one. Nature consciousness, natural world, two. And planet Earth consciousness, or Gaia consciousness, if you like, okay? So in my lifetime alone, the idea or the awareness of humanity as a family, human family, has become apparent in the world. I don't think it was before that, okay? Except amongst gifted and thinking people. But for humanity as a whole, it's a fairly new level of consciousness to think of the whole of us as a family. Likewise, thinking of nature as a whole is new. And out of that come ecology, David Attenborough, everything to do with that, okay? Saving the planet, saving wildlife, and so on. And it was James Lovelock, I think, who revisited the Platonic idea of Gaia, something that Plato had written about 2,000 years ago or more. And when he talked about Gaia, what Lovelock was referring to was the planet as a kind of single entity, like a living being, okay? It wasn't just parts at random, lumped together as a piece of rock. It was a kind of living being, that everything was part of a whole. So these three forms of consciousness, I'm sure, have emerged during my lifetime. And I think the reason for it, Steve, is because they were already there, inside us, as part of our inner cosmos, okay? And just to finish this line, they emerged in that order: humanity, nature, planet Earth, because that's the order in which they are inside us. So because humanity is kind of the next up, so to speak, from us as individuals, it was closest to the surface, and then first to emerge. Next, beneath the surface, was nature, because humanity is part of nature, and it emerged next. And because nature is part of the planet, it emerged next. As to what comes next, the solar system and so on, that's yet to be seen. I've written about it, but maybe that's jumping ahead too quickly.
No, it's great because really what you're suggesting is a reflective activity is just to reflect on, okay, I'm a being, so just get in touch with who I am as a person and my connection with other humans, the humanity, and then look at the reflection that you might have with nature, and then the reflection that you'd have with the Gaia, with the planet, and just I think it's sort of like stopping for 10 minutes and just taking all of this in and just what does it mean to you? That's what you're suggesting in one sense, right?
Well, one very helpful way of thinking about this is the idea of resonance. You know, because we are miniatures of the cosmos out there, that enables us to resonate with the external equivalents, okay? Because they're on the same wavelength, so to speak. And it's that feeling of resonance which we experience as knowing or consciousness. So in a way, resonance is a feeling, literally a feeling. And the feeling is, I know that. I recognize that. You know, somehow I know it. Somehow I feel it. I'm connected with it. You know, I'm connected with the human race. I feel it. It's a strong feeling. I'm connected with the whole of nature. Living where I do, that's very evident. Because nature's everywhere and very evident around here. Likewise, but maybe less so, because it's bigger, the planet. You know, and more people feel that connection with the planet. And they talk about it in spiritual terms, Mother Nature and so on, Mother Earth.
And I know that to be true is because like every Sunday morning I go for my 2-hour walk, and it's walking along the pavement for about 30 minutes to get to my wooded area, and then I spend a good hour, you know, walking around in the wooded area, and then I come back, and it's that distinction of knowing where I am at that point in time is really great. And I think that's where you're suggesting as well, is just paying attention to where you are, what's going on, and taking it in. I think the other part to it, and you hinted at, and I think this is where we're going to go next time, is around something about knowability and knowing, and being able to take a look at that concept, this notion of the knowable universe. And do you want to just speak, like, very briefly, what do you mean by knowing and knowability, so that if people want to just sort of reflect on that, they can be ready for the next interview?
Well, I mean, the whole idea of knowing is fascinating. It's the whole idea. When you start thinking about what you mean by I know, the more you look into it, the more interesting it gets. I mean, I see at least two major, probably three, but two major forms of knowing that we human beings have, that we experience. Well, one is direct and one is indirect. And most of our knowing is indirect. When we talk about knowledge, like scientific knowledge or knowledge in general, it's indirect. It's knowing that someone else has done for us. A good example is Mount Everest. I'm a climber, so I'm interested in mountains. I've never seen Mount Everest physically, but I know it exists, okay? I know what it looks like. I've never seen it physically, but I know what it looks like. I know it's 8,888 meters high above sea level. I know that all of these things, okay? But I only know, and this is the key, this is what I mean by that form of knowing. I only know because I trust other people's knowing. I trust those who've done a direct knowing for me. They've been there, they've done it, okay? They've touched Mount Everest, they've seen it with their naked eyes. Now, all I'm saying is that most of our knowing, human knowing, comes into that category. It's indirect. And then you have direct knowing, okay, which is what we do directly, you know, with our 5 senses or our 6th sense. but we do it without the help of other people. So I know that a pen is lying on the table beside me. I can see it, I can touch it, I can pick it up.
Right, right.
That is direct knowing. And just to round that one off, for me, there are two forms of direct knowing, okay? There's a kind of standard, conventional direct knowing I've just described, using our 5 senses. And then there's the kind of knowing which we sometimes call intuition, by which we mean we know, but we don't know how we know. And I'd like to talk about that next time.
Yeah, and that's where we're going to go with our next interview. It's great that you just gave some preliminary insights, because if people want to look up some information, get the indirect knowing about knowing, right? Then what they can do is, when we get together again, is see some ways, hear some ways that they might be able to get some direct ways about knowing it, and really be able to appreciate what it is that you're sharing with us today. And I know
when I said resonance, Steve, earlier, I talked about our inner cosmos, the layers of our inner cosmos resonate with their outer equivalents. Resonance, okay? That's direct knowing.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that. And we're getting here to the close, because I like to keep these interviews to like 37 minutes and out, or a little bit less. And so I'd like to say thank you very much, Chris, for today's interview, knowing that we're going to go into the knowable universe and this knowability and knowing, and dive down into it a little bit more. I'm hoping that people will get some elements about how what we're sharing here has to do with business and life. Now, I appreciate that, you know, from a wealth, I define wealth, WELLTH, as well-being and well-living. And well-being is certainly the personal. Well-living is about, you know, being with others in your business and that. And we'll help you to understand how these ideas that Chris is sharing sort of weaves back and forth and helps all aspects of your life. And I think that that's an important piece, because this knowable universe, this inner cosmos, also affects your business. It affects your relationships at home. There's lots of ways in which what you're going to hear has great insights in all aspects of your life. So with that, is there one last little piece of sage advice that you'd like to share with everyone, maybe about a minute long? Anything you want to share before we close off today?
I live in the Pyrenees. I live in the Cerdanya Valley, which is in northern Catalonia. It's very beautiful. And I was thinking the other day, talking with someone about it, and she said, it must be stunning. She used the word stunning, okay? Which is quite common, as you know. And I thought, well, actually, it's the opposite. Rather than feeling stunned, in other words, out the game, unconscious, which is what stunned means, you feel the opposite. So if we can find the opposite of stunning, where rather than being stunned into unconsciousness, you are kind of stimulated. You wake up. And I think part of the reason for being unstunned, if I can use that term, Steve, is because of the resonance that I feel with the outer cosmos, with nature, okay? Because what I'm seeing, experiencing, is part of me. Basically, I'm experiencing myself out there. It's almost as if the cosmos is one gigantic mirror, and that part of our purpose in life is to learn to gaze into that mirror and see what it shows us.
Okay, well, that's great. And maybe someday someone who's listening might actually meet you where in your neck of the woods and have a great walk in the Pyrenees with you. I think that would probably be a fabulous way to get to know Chris. So maybe that's something we'll talk about later on in this interview series, how that might happen at some point in time. So with that, Chris, thanks very much for today. Appreciate it. And we'll get together on the next interview and we'll go over the knowable universe. And we'll start to unpack this more and more. So with that, Chris, have a great rest of the day, and we'll catch you on the next interview.
Thank you. You're a great host.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Take care.
Bye-bye.